we will have also a report, and in fact, I want to thank you first. I'm going to introduce you. Please come in. So we are talking about women in science. Women in science at different levels, of course, leaders, but also female researchers, younger researchers as well. This is a session that is sponsored by Elsevier. This is also part of a broader campaign, and I'm going to say one word about the campaign, but then there are two other very good advocates about it on the panel, so I'll let them elaborate. We joined forces between the Elsevier Foundation, Evora, the European Women Rector Association, and the Science Business Network to raise awareness and to give the floor to prominent women rectors across Europe. And that has shaped into a podcast series that was launched last week through Science Business. Two of them were published last week. Interviews with Maria Chiara Carrozza, the president of the Italian Council of Research, the National Council of Research, and Ola as well, who is here, so I'm going to introduce her in a second. And today as well, there is another one from Rian Leschert, the president of Maastricht University. And that will go on for the next week, so keep an eye on that. This session today is part of that campaign. And down the line, there will be a report that Science Business will produce and publish. Okay? Good, so we are joined here today by a distinguished panel. We found a man who would have a difficult task. Well, very brave because he's also stepping in for his boss. So yeah, double brave. Well done. All right, from left to right. Orla Fili, as I said, president of University College Dublin. You're also the president of CESAR, the Association of Universities. Next to you, Gülsün Saglamer. You're the founding honorary president of Evora that I just mentioned, but I should say that you're also a former rector because you were rector of Istanbul Technical University. Next to you, Ilan Shem. Ilan, you're the executive director of the Elsevier Foundation, and relevant to this panel, you're also the co-chair of Elsevier's Gender Equality Task Force. Amanda Crawford, Secretary General of the European University Association, and Bart Weiss, you're the head of the policy department at COST, right? You're stepping in for Ronald, the director of the COST Association, who is unfortunately ill. With that, thank you all for joining us. I mentioned the podcast, and I suggest we actually start by listening very short extracts of selected bits of the interviews. If we can run this, we are going to then use that to feed the discussion, but go ahead.
When you propose your candidature for being rector or similar, you must believe to be able to produce a change.
My experience is that sometimes women are more competitive with other women than with men. So my conclusion is that it is probably the best to have a gender balance, but also diversity of perspectives in the top leadership team of a university.
I cannot hire female if they are not at least equal to the men. And since the number of males is much higher than the number of women, the probability that you hire a man is much higher, even equal merit.
It would be good if there could be dedicated funding for gender equality research, because I believe that there is still plenty of work that needs to be done, and separate funding should be dedicated to the research questions which are joined with gender equality.
And that's something we discuss a lot. The fact that for a woman, children means that it must be hard for you to make a career. For men, it means that, wow, you can do everything.
So that gives us a good basis. I'm sure we will come back to some of these points, but maybe immediate thoughts first. And I may start with you two, actually, Ilan and Gulsun, in that order. Why did you decide to team up in this campaign that we called Breaking the Glass Ceiling? That is, again, meant to feature prominent women rectors. Ilan, do you want to start?
I'll kick off. So I think, first of all, the campaign speaks for itself. It's a fantastic initiative to map the stories of distinguished women leaders, and this project was your brainchild. And we're honored to support it. I just want to give a little bit of perspective about the Elsevier Foundation and why we are so involved in this. So we have been around almost 2 decades. We have about $18 million, have invested about $18 million in projects in the Global South and for women researchers, mostly early career initiatives. So really focusing on leaky pipeline, which is a terrible, terrible, terrible term, and I hope we can drop it. I think of it more as a braided river, as a river that parts, and there are many pathways to excellence. And I think that the stories from our women rectors really indicates that. There's going into policy, going back to research. So let's forget the leaky pipeline. But our history has been with early career researchers. And so doing things, for instance, like supporting accelerators at the Falling Walls Foundation, taking 20 top women scientists from around the world, a lot from Europe, and basically a year-long, lots of training, coaching, getting involved in that big annual meeting, sharing their work. These kinds of things, lots of awards for role modeling. But I think it wasn't until Professor Makiko Naka came to us from RIKEN and said, listen, in Japan, there's a single digits. Women's leaders in the research sphere are in single digits. And with researchers, we're now seeing they're starting to hit 20% or so. But really, we have to do something. And so we started a project looking at doing interviews with female PIs, with women PIs in Japan. And I think when I heard about this initiative, and my colleague Federica Rossetti came to us and said, I've talked to Gulsun, and there's this incredible idea, and we should support it. I said, absolutely. Because the pathways, the stories, the challenges of women leaders at the forefront of the research enterprise, this is priceless, and it's really important for everyone, despite, regardless of their career stage. So that's all I want to say, and then I'll hand over to you, Gulsun.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Does it
go
work?
ahead. Yeah, it's on.
Is it work? Okay. So thank you very much for inviting me here in this very important session. It's very important for me because I devoted at least 1/3 of my life to work for gender equality. And I couldn't understand why half of the population do not have the similar equal rights, equal opportunities, equal responsibilities for the development of humankind. I never understood why. So that's why I have always kept, during my academic life, trying to achieve equal opportunities in the university when we were teaming up our groups to do research or to carry out new educational projects and so on. So that's very important, to give opportunity to the other half. Otherwise, it will continue for years, perhaps. I think it was the fall 2022 when Federica and Claudio approached us if we can do something together for breaking the glass ceiling idea. But it was my last year, so I thought that ethically I'm for that project, but I should ethically leave the signature to my successor. So that we managed to do it, and then this idea developed the podcast first with 15 women leaders across Europe. Then Elsevier and Elsevier Foundation and Evora signed an agreement to work together for increasing women leaders in the coming years. So that's the whole, that's how we started to work together with Elsevier and science business as well, because it was a rather later development to have this cooperation. Then we became more stronger than before to have this team to work for gender equality, for women leadership in higher education.
Ola, you were very brave because you were the first woman we actually interviewed and you were the first podcast we released. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Why do you think, so here again we're talking about leaders, but also as an inspiration to younger women researchers. So may I ask you, you took part in this, and I know you mentioned it during the interview, but why do role models matter?
Well, I suppose at its core, it's that saying, you can't be what you can't see. Now, that's true to an extent. Obviously, if it were entirely true, you'd never have any pioneers. But there is a core of truth to that. I think at all stages of transition and decision along a career, that it helps to see role models who feel like you in some sense. And you talked about the inspiration, and that's so important to inspire, to showcase opportunity, to stimulate ambition, but also I think to reassure and to demystify and to humanize, so that people who are thinking of taking what might seem like a very daunting step, that the step can be somehow lowered for them, or that a handrail can be put in so that they understand that people like them have taken that step and have thrived. And I think it's very important to have different role models at different stage of the career journey, because, you know, to a 17-year-old in school who's considering studying engineering, I mean nothing to her. I may as well be a dinosaur. But if she sees an 18-year-old or a 19-year-old who is studying engineering at university and loving it, or if she sees a 23-year-old who's working in Airbus, then she can relate to that and it can help her along her journey. So I think that role models, they can inspire, they can humanize, but we have to be careful that they are, you know, that they are tailored appropriately to the career stage.
Very good. What about the others? And maybe I'd extend a little bit the question to, well, how do you think leaders, male or female, actually, should tackle existing gender stereotypes when talking to the researchers in their university? Who wants to give it a
Happy
go?
to.
Go.
I think the first, and it's a really, really obvious point, is to actually have a conversation about it, because I think a lot of the time they don't happen. You have to actually be open and upfront and talk about it within an institution. I completely agree with everything Ola just said about the importance of role models, and I think it works on two levels. It works on an individual level, where you need to see women or people at the step ahead of you to aspire to. But I think it also works on an institutional level, where you need to see institutions that have put in place policies and practices and processes that really work in addressing this. So I think we need to look not just at individual role models, but also discuss it at institutions and between institutions. And I think one reason why projects like this are so important is that there aren't that many role models in many parts of Europe. We see a very diverse picture when you come to, say, women in leadership positions. So if they're not going to exist in your own environment, you need to look in the wider environment. So doing it at a European level and providing those role models, I think, are great. But I think we should also, as I say, extend from the personal role models and also look at the institutional role models as well.
Do you want to come in on the question of role models?
I would like to say a few words about role models.
Go ahead.
Leaders play crucial roles as role models in the university environment. But if they are not aware of the equality, then they will only serve in their term. So we have to make them aware that gender equality, as they are role models, gender equality should be one of the main area to devote their time and energy to reach the women candidates in order to create new role models. So they have this duty, I think. Being just a role model for herself is okay, very nice, but they should be working towards achieving gender equality as well.
I'm actually looking at the audience. I see we have one man president, Robertian. And I see we have also Jean-Pierre Bourguignon, who's been a great advocate of gender equality at the ERC. Sorry to put you under the spotlight, and you can say no, but do you have a view on how to tackle the stereotypes about gender equality? How did you approach the question when you were at the ERC? Or Robertian, is there any consideration from TU Eindhoven? How do you handle it? There's a microphone right next to you.
Yes, sorry.
So Robert Jan Smith, the president of TU Eindhoven.
I'm a bad example because when I started at the Eindhoven University of Technology, I discovered on the first day that Eindhoven was the university amongst all universities in Europe which has the lowest number of female professors. I was quite shocked by that because I said I don't want to work at a university which is all the way down the list in Europe. So I proposed something, it was the first decision I proposed, is to have a female quota, gender quota. Vacant posts only for female talent. That led to a huge row, a huge discussion in the university, at national level, even at international level. It brought us to the second page of the Financial Times, which said, top European university decides only to recruit female talent, so it gives a good branding as well. But it helped, and it worked. And that's why I think once in a while, radical measures are important. And the fact that I'm here as president of the university shows that for me it's not something for the HR department, gender equality, it's something where the senior management of the university has to be committed. But I will be very keen to hear your views about the gender quota.
Yeah, I have that.
And I see already some body language saying no. But
no, it's a very important question.
I would like to hear more about it. In our case, it worked out very well, very well.
All right, well, maybe we'll have to bring that question forward. Jean-Pierre, do you want to comment?
I'll bring you the microphone, Jean-Pierre. Voilà.
Thank you.
Thank you. No, actually, I would like to say three different things, briefly, of course. The first one is, of course, I'm talking from the point of view of European Research Council, which is a competitive call of the European Union. And when I took office, 2014, the deficit in women grantees was very significant. And there were two causes to that. One of them was the number of women who applied was much lower than the percentage of women in the same category. That was one cause. And the second cause was the success rate of women was also lower. So I think if you want to address the issue of reality, that is people getting grants, not just, you have to address the two issues. And of course, the first one is very difficult because that's not something you can regulate or even have direct impact. So it's necessarily a long-term effort to really get people who would be advocates for that. The second one is to make sure that when the process of selecting the project is going on, that for sure there is not another layer coming up, that if in fact people tend to be more critical, or maybe women tend to be less assertive, which has a similar effect, that thing. So how can you address that? So the way we addressed it was by doing two different things. The first one was definitely to make this very clear to panel members that there is an issue there, that they have to look at it, and they have to know that there is this tendency of women to underestimate their value and of men to overestimate their value. So, of course, both go in the same directions of reducing the number of women successful. The second thing we did was also to know that in particular for the younger researchers, which as you know is one of the big targets for ERC, it's a typical moment where for women having children makes a big impact. So we decided to create, as you know, there is the measure is the distance to PhD. So 2 to 7 years for starting grants, 7 to 12 years for consolidators. So we decided to, for women, even if they don't take a leave of absence, to add 18 months to the upper limit per child. The only thing you have to produce is the birth certificate. Of course, if men take a leave of absence to raise their children, of course you apply the same thing. And this measure has proven to be remarkably efficient. And one way of measuring this, because you need to check, is if you look at the success rate of women who are in this category who are over time, but over time, not anymore over time because we created this measure, the success rate is the same. So it means that being beyond, but also because of this category still eligible, worked. And so I was very pleased, and actually when I wrote my testament as president of ERC, I think one of the thing I stressed was really that when I left, definitely the success rate of women was definitely slightly higher per category with the success rate of men, so that was
and
done.
I think the overall
but
was
also
28%.
the number of grantees in each category was slightly better than the percentage of women in this category. So of course it's not ideal for the advanced grants, because in the advanced grants there are less women than men, of course. So that's why I tend to fight against the idea of parity everywhere. Because one thing that women don't want, they don't want to be chosen because they are women. They want to be chosen because they are qualified scientists.
Yeah, and that comes back to the question of quota. So I'll put that question to the panel, actually. Yeah, but cost will come, don't worry. Costs have their own way of bringing. But yeah, I'll come to you. What do you want to I mean, we've heard how the ERC worked. Mm-hmm. So why don't you tell us how cost actually operates when it comes to bringing, awarding funding to women?
Yeah. Good afternoon. I'm Bart Vijs, head of the policy department. For those of you who wanted to see Ronald de Bruin, I'm sorry, but he fell ill. So I'll give you some numbers on cost. 49% of the participants in cost are female, and 52% of the leadership positions in cost are held by women. So, and this is without quota. So we don't have, let's say, incentives in order to nominate women in the cost actions. And for those of you who do not know COST is an EU funding program setting up cost actions, which is, let's say, a platform to connect and to collaborate. And we offer training schools, short-term mobility, and we're part of the widening pillar. That's a little side note. So, but what we do is we really try to focus on the inclusive nature of cost, not only in terms of geography and age. We have some incentives for nominating young researchers, for example, in leadership positions. There are incentives and a bit more strong measures in order to, let's say, create a European scope within the cost actions. But in terms of, let's say, gender equality, we don't have fixed, let's say, numbers or quota. But because of the openness of the platform and on how we, let's say, incentivize the cost actions from the start on, with all kind of information to provide them also during the lifetime of their project, you see that there is a natural, let's say, equal participation rate in terms of male-female in cost actions. And we also celebrate success stories and role models. Like this week is the week of women and girls in science. We always do some media outreach. We have a live blog on our website where we promote, let's say, successful stories of female researchers within our networks. So this is how we approach.
So what does an incentive means? Does a grant application with more women or more young researcher or a particular geographical area get more points?
Yeah, that's a rather detailed question to answer. That's only the case in the so-called grey zone, when there's an equal scoring. Then they look at the excellence and inclusiveness objectives of the proposal, where a network who will focus more on, let's say, diversifying its membership will get, let's say, an advantage to another proposal. But incentives, we really talk about, let's say, information providing to the cost action, how they can really, let's say, take into account the gender aspect within their activities. And it's also about encouraging them to take, for example, to nominate gender equality leadership position, for example, someone who focuses within the course of the project on the gender equality within leadership positions, within events that are organized, within panels, if you organize events. So that these are some of the activities we try to foster.
Very good. Thank you And yes, Ola. Go
Yes,
ahead.
I'd love to come in on Robert
Yes.
Jan's point because we in Ireland were very aware of the Eindhoven initiative, and following that brought in an initiative for so-called women-only professorships in Ireland. Now, it was a certain number of positions, and there were a lot of questions. Is this legal? Is it fair? And people would say, well, Eindhoven did it, so Ireland can do it. So it just shows the ripple effect that these activities can have. And the women professors are in place, and they're wonderful, and the sky has not fallen in for those who were concerned about it. This was part of a much broader shift in Ireland at that time. Up until 2020, there had never been a female president of any Irish university. Now, of our 13 universities, 7 have women presidents, so more than half, in other words, and that is in the space of 4 years. So there was a really concerted effort around this topic. One thing that I would say, because it's really interesting me at the moment, is if you look, initiatives such as this align with our values in Europe, with our commitment to equality, diversity and inclusion. If you look at other countries, and I'm thinking in particular of the United States, you can see how DEI, as they call it there, has been weaponized against the universities. It is being used in many quarters to undermine the entire mission of universities. So, and, you know, we feel perhaps remote from that sentiment in Europe to an extent, but I don't know how far we can continue to feel remote from that sentiment. So I think it's really interesting to look across the water and to see how activities that are in pursuit of DEI, EDI, have become very, very contested and problematic, spreading out the whole higher education landscape in the United States.
Ivan.
I just wanted to sort of note, I wonder if it's less about quotas or aspirational targets. I think it's very much about placing the debate front and center in an organization. So if I think of the context within Elsevier, where I'm really advising around gender equity, and we have this task force, and it went from being a grassroots initiative to being something that was, you know, the top down met the top met the, you know, the bottom, the middle, and there's this huge momentum, and it does help that we have a woman CEO, Kumsal Bayazit, who's so completely passionate about this work. But what we see is that instead of being something on the margins and something that's tolerated, it's now part of the strategy, you know, the things that have to be achieved. And so we meet every month with the head of strategy. We have this massive dashboard looking at editorial boards and, but also sex and gender in research, and you know, the guidelines, have these been implemented across all of Elsevier's 2,800 journals? So I mention Elsevier because it's not a university, but it's you know, it is very central to the research ecosystem. And I think if you can really start to hit the parity zone with editors, with editorial boards, you will make an impact. Also, you know, conferences, we have something like 50 conferences a year. Those are opportunities for early career researchers to shine, to build careers. So I just wanted to say, I think it's that dialogue, that it permeates every level of the organization, and it's no longer a kind of tolerated thing in a, you know, in some room somewhere, but really central to the DNA of an organization.
Gulsen first, and then
Well, I would like to give you short information about my experience. I think it is very difficult when you put the rules in order, you know, some sort of measures to achieve equality, written, you know, rules, then there is a resistance coming from the other half, mainly. So, and they start questioning why you should give this right women, because her performance is not equal to the men's performance, and so on. So when I became director, I'm coming from the Faculty of Architecture, where the half of the, you know, students were girls, and 1/3 of the, more than 40% of the professors female. So I'm coming from that culture. But when I moved to the main campus, and there were all the engineering departments, I saw that the situation is completely different. So in that case, if I was going to ask the Senate or the, executive committee, let's design some sort of, written documents in order to achieve better gender equality, I was sure that there would have been, resistance. So what I did, I composed 20 young academics as advisors for me. More than half of them were women. So the rectorate was full of young female academics. So people started to see them at top level, So that was a very good idea, I think, for me. So then, then I provided, opportunities to send the academics abroad. We sent some 150 young academics, and I take care about, again, the same thing without putting any quota. So this kind of things, without written, rules, you can make implementation and also make try to give equal rights. On the other hand, when you look at why women academics having problems in their career, we are talking about when they have child, when they have home responsibilities, they are not able to work properly in order to get the next step in their academic career. What we did, I established K-12 schools with nursery in the campus. So they brought their children to campus in the morning, and they, in the afternoon, late afternoon, they took them to their home. So that was very influential. Also, when we were forming the committees for giving professorship or associate professorship, I didn't tell the Senate and the executive committee that, well, 1/3 of this group should be female. But I was bringing always female candidates for the committees, So that they were all the, established persons. They deserve to be there. But nobody thinks of them, My male colleagues were not thinking of those, very valuable female candidates to be in the board. So that's how I managed to run 8 years. Do you know what happened? I did it by heart, because I was thinking that the whole university should be like the Faculty of Architecture, you see, because it looks very male-dominated, that it doesn't, comfort me, that environment. So at the end of 8 years, professors went up from 16% to 29%. Wow. Female professors. And after me, the same tendency continued and reached to now 39%.
So not as
in
fast.
A technical university, and female professors are forming 39%. So I think, we have to take it easy, create, smooth actions, not writing down everything and making the people that you have to do it, So this is written, so you have to take care about in that way. So I think, we can do it much more easily, I believe.
Ola, I want to ask you, the case of Ireland is very interesting because in 2020 there wasn't one woman rector. What happened? What made your leadership, your career up to the top possible? What are the key factors?
Well, do you mean Ireland or my
in
career
Ireland,
specifically? In Ireland, well,
and yourself as well, but the Irish case is particularly interesting.
Well, I think in Ireland, first of all, there was a real political spotlight shone on the fact that we'd never had a woman president of any university. So politicians got very exercised by this. It was something that was repeatedly highlighted and used against us, if you like, as a system. So they brought in at that point, many of you will know the Athena Swan programme, which arose in the UK, a system whereby universities apply for recognition for their activities around gender equality. So Irish universities had to apply for Athena Swan recognition in order to be eligible for research funding. So again, there was a stick there applied to us. But there was also a carrot in that there were so many people within the institution who really, really wanted to do this. So the Athena Swan programme is based around, first of all, a self-assessment. You look at where you currently stand in relation to gender equality. You come up with an action plan in order to improve this, and you set targets and benchmarks, and you measure yourself and you report against those. So it's like you said, Gulton, and it's like Ilan, you mentioned about dashboards. You know, I think as I'm an engineer, like many of you are here, and there's a real power in the dashboard, in the necessity to measure and report. And bit by bit, we undertook actions. And there's a woman, I think Virginia Valian in the United States, who studies this, and she says that mountains are molehills piled one upon the other. So if you address the molehills one by one, so if you look at gender balance on decision-making committees, if you look at wording in job advertisements, if you look at core decision-making meeting hours not straying into family time, bit by bit, you take lots of what seem individually like small actions, but cumulatively the impact can be very significant.
Amanda, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I would want to make a couple of points about quotas, but firstly, just on the Irish example, I think what's happened in Ireland, as I understand it, is you've actually had some really good concrete initiatives, like you say. So you've had the Senior Academic Leadership Initiative, exactly. So, I mean, and the fact that, you know, the EU Award for Gender Equality Champions in 2023, three out of four of those went to Ireland. So you can see really concrete examples of initiatives and role models and so on that I think is a lot of what it's about. I mean, coming back to quotas, I have to admit I'm really conflicted on this topic. I completely understand, as Robert Jan said, that sometimes you need radical action, but I think that it has to be the right quota and the right target. It can't be an arbitrary number, and it can't just be 50-50 for the sake of it. You know, as Jean-Pierre said, not everything's equal. There are different disciplines. There are male-dominated disciplines. There are female-dominated disciplines. So you've got to be a little bit kind of nuanced about it. I think what we need to be thinking about is not a quality of outcome, it's a quality of opportunity. So I think, you know, we need a level playing field, so everybody the system is fair and the assessment process is fair, but that doesn't mean the outcome should always be 50-50, because it's artificial, and I don't think it necessarily achieves anything. And just a kind of sort of anecdotal, just a short anecdote. I worked in an organisation a few years ago where a membership organisation, where at one point 48 of our 50 member organisations were headed by men. So we only had 2 out of 50 women. And our board was made up of the heads of the organisations, and we would regularly be criticised in the press for not having 50% of women on the board. And it's like, well, I understand that, but I can't do anything. I can only work with the membership I've got, which has kind of 1 in 25 is a woman. So I think we need to look further back in the pipeline sometimes. And, you know, so that's a situation where a quota would have made no sense, because it just simply would have been impossible to fulfill.
Very good. I know there are more reactions from the room. Before you take the floor, I'm going to put a question to the panel, but also to the audience. We've heard the case of Orla, but also of Gulsun, in their journeys to reach top leadership position inside a university. We're going to use the Mentimeter application, and in fact there will be, so you have QR codes that are going to appear, and while it appears, I pose the question, at the national and European level, what barriers women are likely to encounter in their career development or in reaching leadership position? All right, one word. We'll gather all of them. And if you can put it here as well. You have the question. You have the QR code. Have fun. we'll look at the word cloud in a minute. But well, we have two things to do, but I think she's downloading the QR code. So do you want to take that question first? We've heard about having children. So that's connected to welfare, right? If there was one barrier that you want to bring forward, one barrier that actually needs to be teared down. Well, do you want to start?
Cultural barrier.
Sorry?
Cultural barrier.
Cultural barriers.
Cultural barrier plays...
Turkey is a difficult case, right? You don't have an easy government over there.
Well, now it's getting worse and worse. But still, universities have quite a good percentage of female academics across Turkey. But at top level, at leadership level, unfortunately, it's decreasing. We reached the 10%, but it's went back to 7-8%. So cultural.
Okay, that's one.
A good one earlier. It was Glenda Gray in an earlier panel about the Global South. You were talking about mentorship and networking. Maybe it was networking more, and that women actually just often don't have time to network. They're trying to do everything at the top of their power, whether it's their research, taking care of their families, running around. And so these really critical moments around networking and building your careers, finding your sponsors, are just not happening.
Belt?
Yeah, and I think in academia, and I think I heard it in one of the podcasts as well, is that longer term abroad stays in academia are still very much rewarded. So that you do a PhD or a postdoc at another university, then the chances for promotion are still higher. And that's not always easy to leave a family behind, not as a mother, but also not as a father. But I think this is a barrier which is more difficult to overcome for female researchers instead of male researchers. The long-term abroad stay in academia.
Additional.
I agree with all that has been said. I think that there are structural issues, and too often initiatives to support women advance are about fixing the women when they should be about fixing the system. So times of meetings, as I said, job descriptions, language, all the little ways in which a system, even without knowing it, perpetuates a certain expectation about its leadership. So I think we need to look at all those structural elements.
Good.
I think I would say as well the issue of self-confidence. We had a project recently called New Lead, which was about leadership and transformation, and 1/3 of that was about enhancing female leadership. And when we looked at the challenges in there, a big thing that came back time and time again was about self-confidence and self-belief and thinking I can put myself forward for this promotion. And I saw some really interesting things about a study the other day where in Spain they looked at they looked at the fact that women repeatedly self-select themselves out of promotion. So they might try for promotion once, and if they don't get it, they don't try again. Whereas that may not be the case for men always. So I think there's something to be sort of addressed at that level as well, which goes back to the role models point again.
All right. Ilan, and then we'll take a few reactions in the room.
Well, so I wanted to just say, what about, of course, how research excellence is evaluated? So traditionally, your citation metrics, your footprint, these are the things we've been measuring on for a very long time. And I have some, I'd like to give a little sneak peek from Elsevier's upcoming gender report, which I think sheds some light on this. So let me just give some background. Elsevier's been working in this area of gender and analytics since 2015, really trying to understand what's happening in terms of women's output and men's output, but on these indicators. And I think what we've seen over the years, we've done a series of these reports. We've also contributed to the SHE figures to kind of provide that evidence base to policymakers. But what we've seen most recently, the upcoming report, it'll come out May 2nd, my colleagues at Elsevier have really expanded the indicators, much broader indicators. So not just citation, but looking at things like SDG research, looking at policy citations, at media, altmetrics, open access, and a whole of, far broader, as well as, of course, patent citations and so forth. But what we start to see then is that women researchers are very strong in this area that isn't really measured for research excellence, like policy citations and media, and you get the idea.
Well, indicators and metrics are important.
Yeah, and so I did want to say that there's some great data in there that I think can be used to inform the next framework.
Well, what we do with the data is another question, and in fact, we should look at it across the board. But okay, there are plenty of. Go ahead. You were very patient.
I guess I've got the mic, so I get the lead. I'm Glenda Gray. I'm the president of the South African Medical Research Council, the first female president.
Well done.
It's 50 years. But anyway, I believe in active transformation, and South Africa is faced with both a racial and a gender imperative. And when I came to the MRC, we were funding mostly white men in Ivy League universities. And having an active transformation agenda allowed us to recalibrate the way we fund science in South Africa. And we created specific calls that only women could apply for, because there's a lot of imposter syndrome and women don't think they're good enough. But when we created women-only calls, we got highly capable and wonderful scientists who could easily do the job. And likewise, we created Black African scientist calls, because we also have an issue of imposter syndrome when it comes to Black scientists. And I guess the elephant in the room here is we talk about gender issues, but there's also a lack of diversity in science, and this is a very white conversation where we're not talking about the racial barriers. So if you're a Black woman, it's even harder to succeed than if you're a white woman. So I do believe that, in South Africa, we have a constitution where you can't unfairly discriminate against people, but you can fairly discriminate to correct past imbalances. And it's a very good, important thing. So we have active transformation where we report actively on the movement of race and gender in our institutions. And we have employment equity, so that when people are applying for jobs, we set, for this position, we can only interview women, and we need to have we have 4 racial classifications in South Africa: white, coloured, Indian, and Black African, and we set the equity about what we can employ. So in that way, we actively rectify the past imbalances. And for me, it's not about whether women can do it. They can do it as good as men. But there are a lot of structural barriers and academic barriers that make them feel that they're inferior. And also the way women are treated in science, again, reinforces the issue around the imposter syndrome.
All right. Not an easy one to follow up on, but Robertian, you're next. And then we'll go around here. Thank you.
Coming back to radical measures, because that's something which was debated. We did it, of course, because we were bottom of the list of all European universities, and that's why, when we asked the question to ourselves, how long have we been trying? Well, for years we've been trying without any effect. And what we wanted to do with this very rough measure, the quota, is to have a cultural change. And one of my deans came to me and he said, I have to admit something. Now that I can only recruit female talent, I had to look in my field if there are any good female talents, because we recruit worldwide. And he said, guess what? I found 12 in my specific field, plasma physics. And I said, but what you do then in the past? Well, I said, with a vacant post, we send it around to the all-boys network. But then also quite interesting, he went even further. He called these 12 candidates, and he said, in order to convince them, and it's also quite interesting, their reaction, out of the 12, 10 said, do you really think I qualify for that? So that's also quite an interesting phenomenon. Another radical measure which we took when I was still in Brussels, the programs, we started to see figures, which already mentioned, but there was another thing, that was the expert panels for evaluating proposals. we imposed there 40% should be female researchers. And I got a lot of criticism from my program managers at the European Commission. So it's impossible, we don't find these experts in these very specific fields. And I said, don't tell me out of a database of 40,000 experts, you can't find each year 500 people, dealing with a specific topic. So from time to time, you have to take a rough measure in order to change the culture. And now it's not even an issue anymore. These people are found, these 40%. So I still plead from time to time for radical measures.
All right. And when we pass the microphone around, can we show the cloud of words from the responses? Racial barriers, those are the ones at the bottom. Discouragements, politicians' discouragements, or they are two different. Prejudice, family, lack of network, bias in selection. All right, should we keep going? Carlos, go ahead.
Now I have the microphone, which is useful if we only have one. That makes it easier. I don't think I have a question, but maybe it's also more comment in general. There is progress. So if we all look back decades through our careers, right, things have changed. What I don't know is how secure that progress is. And you've mentioned the case of Turkey. You've mentioned the US. I think in the US it's more criticism leveled against the institution of the university, using whatever argument is available to discredit them. Now that that came in handy in a sense. It's not directly against women, but it's politicizing it. On the other hand, the question is, is the progress we have seen a progress in good times? And what happens in bad times? So it's not a question, it's just a comment I wanted to make, because I'm personally concerned that the progress we've made is not very secure.
There were two more. There was, one here and one on there.
Yeah, Katrin Stöber from GEANT. I'm the only female exec in GEANT. We are 7 exec members, 1 female, there we go. My question is to you, because I assume that you're all in leadership positions, and it collects a little bit to what Carlos just said. To what extent do you see that your own management style also changes the way your institution works? Because I imagine that if for, I don't know how many hundreds of years, the Irish institutions were led by men, they must have a feeling of a leadership style that is intrinsically male. And the men look for the hierarchy, and then you come in as a female leader. And my own experience is we don't do so well in hierarchy. I think actually as women, putting hierarchy into an environment with other women completely doesn't work. So how do you change the institution long term so that you're not a woman stuck in a male leadership environment? So I always say the differences between Margaret Thatcher and Angela Merkel, right? Margaret Thatcher was a woman in a male hierarchy, and when she failed because the man just dropped her. Angela Merkel was a woman surrounded by women, and she couldn't fail because there was, every time somebody attacked her, there was a woman in front saying, no, as women do, right? So how do you do that? How do you build up your own base? And how do you change the leadership style in your organization so that it becomes different, so that it becomes also more inviting, that we find that, this is a home, this is not something, this is something that where we can identify with in a management environment?
That's an important one. There was just one final, so we'll take it, but we are approaching the end of the session, so I'm afraid then we'll have to give the floor to the panel.
Thank you.
Go
I'll
ahead.
try and keep it quick. So we're talking about women in science, but also like to bring the idea of science for women.
Can you introduce yourself?
Sorry, I'm Fionn from DSW, we're a global health NGO. So we know that women in leadership and women in science is also very important for putting women's needs and issues on the research agenda. So in the UK, for example, only 2% of publicly funded health research is focused on reproductive and sexual health needs, even though that we know 1 in 3 women will be impacted by gynecological or reproductive issues during her lifetime. A quick question really about how do we push forward? We've seen progress in the number of women in science and leading in science, but have we seen the dial shift in terms of actually funding going towards issues that predominantly impact women? Would just be interested in your thoughts and what's the next step there.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for being so engaged, actually. Okay, we've got plenty to discuss. What I'm going to do is answer to any question or any comment that we heard, but please bundle that in the form of a recommendation that we can pick up and address, that policymakers can pick up and address when shaping the next framework program. All right?
And for me, all the comments and questions were so interesting, and I'd love to have time to get into every single one of them in great detail. Maybe one that I'll respond to is Glenda's comment about, because it's something that struck me, we're a very white group here, and you know we've talked about gender equality, but equality in all its dimensions, you know, race and ethnicity, neurodiversity, disability, socioeconomic status, you know, all of these, you know, if we talk about the need for our academic systems, our research systems to reflect the population, we have to be cognizant of all these dimensions. So maybe that's one recommendation, if you're looking for a recommendation, that we consider all the dimensions of equality when we are looking to frame the next framework program. But all the other questions, you know, the question of that, you know, progress is not to be taken for granted, you know, how we really embed what we've achieved, the question of changes in an institution, just having a woman leader is not in itself enough. All brilliant points, and I'd love to be able to discuss them more.
Do you surround yourself with women?
Well, you know, I was just thinking...
already addressed that.
I was thinking when you asked that question, since I was appointed president, which was in May of last year, I've appointed 7 members of my management team or management team adjacent roles. Of those 7, and this may actually be somewhat problematic, 6 have gone to women. Now that it was absolutely not my imperative in doing this, but maybe it was cultural, maybe those who applied for roles felt a little bit more comfortable. But you know, that in itself actually is not good. I don't want to have a pendulum swing too far. Often you find historically that when professions or areas become feminized, they lose their status as a consequence. So it would be awful, unthinkable if higher education, if research somehow were deemed no longer sufficiently interesting or exciting to men. That would be terrible. We need balance in every dimension. So yeah, really interesting food for thought.
Good thing.
Oops.
It's okay.
Where is it?
Go on.
Is it? I think it's very important to provide equal opportunities to all. You know, when you look at the research teams, there are females, but rarely you see the team leader as a female person. So usually women take the most difficult tasks in this, you know, projects. But at the end, when it comes to the publication, her name is at the end of the list. So this creates, and women is shy to fight for this kind of things. That's why my name at the end of the list, you see, I did a lot here in the project, but my name is in the last name in the list. Why? So all of these things, small things, you know, when they come together, create big problems for females, and they became silent, you know, because they see that there are lots of things that she has to fight. So it is very difficult, and next time probably she will be out of that research group. So if she keeps complaining about it. So all of these things, you know, cultural problems and structural problems are together. So we cannot expect to overcome this problem overnight. It will last for some years, but we have never give up. We should never give up, you know. We should be very patient and repeat the same, you know, mistakes that the other half have been doing for centuries, you see.
Not pointing fingers.
Yes, this is very important. I mean, if you create good opportunities for childcare, if you provide, you know, funding, extra funding, to give opportunities to female academics as well. And if you lift all of those kind of limitations from their lives, they will be more powerful, more successful than their male counterparts. I am sure about that. But life is not going in that direction, unfortunately. For example, when we look at this, for example, gender equality plan applications across the universities, and it is really unbelievable because each country and each university in each country have different, different settings, different customs, and so on. So when you ask them, you have to implement gender equality plans, they created, I know what's happening across Europe, they created them, they have an office, but nothing happens, it's just writing down the things, but when you look at the actual situation, it's not going well. So because each country, each school, each university has different problems. One size does not fit all.
Very good. 30 seconds each, because we have reached the end.
Okay, maybe just to throw out a number, also from the new gender report coming out. 25 years ago, there were 34% of researchers were women. And today, in the EU, it is 42%. And I just want to say that things are changing slowly but surely. Of course, when you look at senior leadership, it's really only just starting to hit 30% in Europe. But so, I think we have to measure. I think that this critical mass is also leading to more investigation of sex and gender in research. You're seeing that the uptake, COVID is being looked at differentially. These are ideas that are really coming of age, and I'm thinking of the Gendered Innovations work has led to that, the European funded, NSF funded, heart attack presenting differently in women than men, all of this is coming of age, and I think the critical mass does help. I just wanted to say that these interviews, and I had the pleasure of interviewing you, it was really an honor, but it's not just about great stories and amazing careers, it's really about your recommendations for the next European framework. And so maybe just to say that this panel, your comments, the stories, the pathways, all of this will lead into a report coming out after this conference.
And there will be more recommendations coming, and all of that will come together in a report. If you have, you can...
I'll be very quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
To add a couple of points on the data, in 2022, we looked at all of our members. We had about 850 at the time, and we found that less than 20% of the leaders of universities were female, 18-point-something%, which is not good. But then you look at the fact that is actually a 73% increase over an 8-year period. So I think we don't need to look at just the raw figures, we need to look at the kind of progress as well. You also find that although 20% of rectors are female, 30% of vice-rectors were female, and 60% of people in other managerial positions like heads of international offices or heads of research were women. So I think it's not quite as bleak a picture as we think it is sometimes. And then my final point on the recommendations, I completely agree with everything that's been said about embedding gender in a wider debate about diversity and inclusion. And I think we have to not forget that not all women have the same lives and the same challenges and the same experiences, which is, I think, sometimes a trap that we fall into in debating this.
Thank you. Final word to the minority. Go ahead.
I have a very concrete recommendation for FP10, and this is more anonymity in research evaluation. This is something we do at COST since 2014, and this has led to a huge diversity, not only in geographical spread, but also in gender and age distribution. And this is to ensure that a young female researcher with an excellent idea has the same opportunity as the old boys network applying for grants.
That sounds very good.
I have last word.
Oh my
God.
God.
Sentence. One sentence.
10 seconds.
Do you know European Institute for Gender Equality? They're doing a lot of valuable work. So I'm quoting from them.
Okay.
With gender equality inching forward by only 1 point every 2 years, it will take nearly 3 generations to achieve gender parity at the current pace. I'm not telling this, they say so.
Okay, right. We should end on a very, on a more optimistic note, I
So
think.
we have to face the
There
you
is
know,
a reality,
the problems.
but there's also a lot of willingness,
We
and
still have
we
long way
observe
to go.
changes. So thank you very much. I want to thank you in the room for also participating in the debate, and please join me in thanking the speakers.